Welcome to an informational session on copyright in the classroom, presented by Andrew Johnston. Here's a little introduction. As I said before, my name is Andrew Johnston. I am currently pursuing my master's degree in library science at the University at Buffalo, and I am employed at the Cheektowaga Central School District as a senior library clerk in the Library Media Center there. So let's get started. Here's the agenda for the presentation today. We'll discuss an introduction to copyright, fair use. I'll show you Creative Commons and licenses and materials that can be used through the Creative Commons. Some multimedia issues with copyright. Copyright and the internet, there's a lot of stuff to talk about there, particularly with digital rights and YouTube we will discuss. And I'll give some basic guidelines to follow. And I'll have you complete an evaluation survey on the presentation at the end. Copyright is listed in the United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, and was actually signed in by George Washington in 1790. And it grants authors and inventors exclusive rights to their respective writings and discoveries. Furthermore, copyright has gone through numerous changes, and we currently work off the Copyright Act of 1976. And then from there on, there have been little changes, minor tweaks throughout the years. So what are we allowed to do under the copyright laws? There are 6 rights of the copyright holder. The first is reproduction. Reproduction allows the owner to make copies of the material that they want. It is their right as the copyright holder. 2 is adaptation, and this allows us to change or create derivative works based on our original work that we created. This is, akin to making a novel into a screenplay for a movie. 3 is distribution. Distribution occurs in many different ways. For example, passing out worksheets to a class, borrowing books from the school library, forwarding emails, putting work on the internet, student work or teacher work, are all forms of distribution. The next we have public performance and public displays. Public performance refers to showing film, video, dance, theater performances, or music performances in a public place, like a school, rather than a performance in your privacy of your own home if you're showing a video to your sons or daughters. And public displays refers to static work like artwork, posters, and other visual displays. But the one thing there that you have to know is you can't upload these videos or these images to the web, as that would be a public display. Finally is the digital transmission of sound recordings. And this came about due to the digital music revolution with Napster and the internet, and copying and sharing music through peer-to-peer sharing sites and other means of transmission. This is still a very hot topic and probably needs its own presentation to discuss these many issues of digital transmission of sound recordings. Let's look at some of the positive things.
All right, now that we have an understanding of the basics of copyright, let's talk about what we as educators can do with copyrighted materials. Now, part of the copyright law is the concept of fair use, and that means that educators and individuals are allowed to use copyrighted materials for themselves. As educators, we have more fair use rights than any individual does. It allows us and our students to use copyrighted materials without permission. Now, fair use is a principle, as I said, is part of the copyright law. No one can take that away from you. A good example of that is a videotape. When you go to the store and you rent a videotape, it has a label on it that says for home use only. Well, they're just telling you that you don't have the public rights to show that video to a whole bunch of people. But under fair use, you can take that into your classroom and show it as long as you meet the fair use guidelines. So let's talk a little bit about what fair use is. Basically, fair use was a deal that was struck between educators, publishers and producers, and the folks who own the copyright to these materials. Congress decided that they wanted to encourage not only creativity for the copyright holder, but they wanted to encourage education too. So what they decided to do was come up with a compromise between the publishers who wanted us to pay for absolutely everything that we used, and the educators who wanted to use absolutely everything that there was to use without paying for it. So fair use turned out as a compromise. Not everybody was satisfied with it on either side of the equation, but it allows us as educators to do an awful lot with copyrighted materials that no one else in our society can do.
Okay, thanks. And John Brin is the Section Chief for Resources, Development, and Evaluation Services, Instructional Technology Division of the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And he has a whole website dedicated to issues of copyright and teachers. So let's look at the 4 fair use guidelines. The first is the purpose and character of use. You should ask yourself, will this material be used for educational purposes, non-profit use, and things like criticism, commentary, and reporting, like citing quotes in a term paper or in a presentation. When determining fair use, you should also look at the nature of the copyrighted work. And you should look at if the work is factual or creative. Facts are free to use, and creative works like literature, novels, poems, and drama, art, and music would have issues with copyright if you were just using it outright. And you should also look at if the work is published or not published. If the work is published, it means that it is already on display for the public and can be used as long as you cite when borrowing from that work. An unpublished work is something that would be including letters, diaries, family photographs that an author or somebody would not have published on their own and could pose trouble for fair use guidelines. The third guideline is the amount and substantiality of the portion used. This is basically how much of a material are you going to be using. And later in the presentation, we will discuss different aspects in the multimedia section about what about how much and what can be used of text, music, film and video, and even data sheets. The last guideline is the effect of the use upon the potential market or value of the work. This is basically if you are gaining any sort of commercial use of a certain work, and that would yield a poor result in the fair use guidelines. Okay, let's look at Creative Commons. Now, Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization that allows for the sharing and using of creativity and knowledge through free legal tools. And this is great for teachers and students alike, because there is also so many different course materials, music, pictures, and videos that can be accessed through Creative Commons. The Creative Commons provides 4 licenses for your material on top of a copyright. So these licenses work with your copyright and allows you to modify your copyright to suit your needs as the owner. So there's 4 licenses. Attribution. This license allows others to copy, distribute, display, and perform the work and derivative of the works based on it, but only if original is attributed to the author. So if you have something out there and you want it to be used, just make sure that you're citing it and that other people are citing your work as well. The second license is share alike. This license allows others to distribute derivative works only under a license identical to the original. So if the original work has certain aspects of it, that the work that is created must also have the exact licenses and copyright issues if they are to distribute them as well. The third is a non-commercial Creative Commons license, and you may copy material but only for non-commercial, non-profit purposes only. Fourth is a no derivative works, and this is exact copies. You cannot edit or modify the original. It has to be the exact copy of original, and credit must be given to the original owner. Here's a link to the Creative Commons search engine available at search.creativecommons.org. And this search site allows you to search open in Creative Commons images, video, and pictures, as well as course material that can be used to create lesson plans. This is a great site to check out for students and teachers alike. Now let's get into multimedia and copyright. These will be some basic guidelines for using multimedia in presentations for teachers and students. The first is observe quantity limits. It must support direct instruction. And multimedia and the copyright allows for students to keep presentations for class, and teachers have a 2-year limit on works that they produce with multimedia. And you should always acknowledge copyrighted work in a bibliography or mediography at the end of presentations. So let's get into the specific quantity limits for multimedia projects. So let's start with motion media. This includes film, television, and video clips. So you have up to 10% of the total time of the work, or up to 3 minutes, whichever is less. So if a student was working on a multimedia presentation about the Twilight series and comparing the text and the movies, he or she would be able to use a short clip in their presentation, up to 3 minutes, or 10% of the total time. Next is text, and here you can use up to 10% of the work, or up to 1,000 words. And there's also some tricky issues here involving poetry. So with poetry, teachers and students can use poems shorter than 250 words, can be used in its entirety, but only 3 poems by one poet, or 5 poems by different authors in an anthology. Poems longer than 250 words, you can only use 3 excerpts from a single poet, or 5 from an anthology. The next is music, lyrics, and music videos. Again, up to 10% or 30 seconds of music, lyrics, and music videos can be used in a multimedia presentation. And this 30-second limit is important especially for students who want to include a music video or music in the background of their presentations with multimedia. So 30 seconds is the key there. Next, we have illustrations, cartoons, and photos. With illustrations, cartoons, and photos, a single illustration, cartoon, and photo can be used in its entirety in the multimedia work, but no more than 5 from a single artist. If you are a teacher collecting images from an anthology or a single collective work, you have, again, the 10% or 15 total images can be used from that collective work. And the last is numerical sets, numbers, databases, spreadsheets. Again, it's up to 10% or 2,500 fields or cells. And an example of this would be a student researching an actor and using Internet Movie Database to do some research. They can gather up to 10% of the database fields. So let's get into copyright and the Internet. Now here there is no set copyright guidelines for the Internet, but it is important to follow the 4 fair use factors that we discussed earlier. And a big issue that comes up with the Internet and copyright is this Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And the Digital Millennium Copyright Act establishes some forms of protection from liability when infringing material appears within a school district, most notably on a school website. This really extends to the school district. And it's basically a takedown policy. If images or copyright material appears, then the Digital Millennium Copyright Act allows infringing material to be removed immediately. Let's discuss YouTube and copyright. First thing you should do when using YouTube in the classroom is be aware of YouTube's Terms of Service or License Agreement. Any copyrighted material posted to YouTube will be issued a takedown notice. Beware of student privacy issues when filming students and then uploading images of the students through video to YouTube. You can download videos from YouTube as long as permission is granted from the video itself. And you can always embed or link videos to your website from YouTube, or even just use the entire YouTube embedded player in your teacher page to avoid any issues. Finally, let's just go over general copyright guidelines. Always ask permission when using copyrighted material. Follow the 4 factors of fair use, determining the purpose and character of the use, the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount used. Follow those quantity guidelines in the multimedia section. And the 4th is the effect of the potential market. This is if you're using it for commercial value. Always cite your sources. Stay informed. And ask your library media specialist if you have any questions or concerns involving copyright issues with students, even with yourselves as teachers. Following here are some helpful copyright links. The first link there, the copyright for teachers, is where the John Brim video series is. There's a lot of helpful information there. The U.S. Copyright Office, Creative Commons links, and a few other websites dedicated to copyright. And here's, let's just finish up with an evaluation survey. You can send completed surveys to me at the following email addresses.